this talk is about the future of platforms. See what I did there? I linked the two things. Manuel is going to take to the stage and tell us about the future of platforms. Give Manuel a huge applause. And later on, give him a rating in the Hopin app. Bye.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here at Conf on site for the first time. I heard a lot of good things about the conference. And I watched Sam Newman's keynote yesterday, who was here. Hopefully, almost everyone. It was really great. Sam is awesome. But I have to say, I started to sweat a little bit with the title of his talk. You keep using that word, but it doesn't mean what you think it means. And I thought, is he going to talk about platforms? But fortunately, it was something else, right? So I want to talk today a little bit about what might be the future of platforms beyond engineering, right? In this conference and in the last months and years, we've talked a lot about platform engineering and how internal developer platforms can help us, and that's amazing, but there's maybe a lot more potential, right? So hopefully you're interested to hear about that as well. So I'm Manuel Pais. I'm one of the authors of the book Team Topologies, and it's interesting that it's been actually 10 years now that Matthew, my co-author, published a first blog post about DevOps topologies. So that was kind of the initial seed that grew into eventually Team Topologies. And he was talking about different patterns, anti-patterns that we then together evolved over time. And so I'd like to go back to this idea of DevOps, right? And interestingly, Patrick Debois, who was one of the initiators of DevOps movement, only a couple of years ago, and I checked this with him to be sure, only a couple of years ago, he came up with his own definition, where he was saying, well, DevOps is everything you need to do to overcome friction between silos, right? All the rest is plain engineering. And engineering is very important to help us remove friction, but it's not the only thing we need to consider, right? So whenever people ask me about, well, what do you think about this meme of DevOps is dead or platform engineering killed DevOps? Well, I point them to this definition, right? There's more to it. So I want to do a very brief recap of what have we been able to do with DevOps, right? We removed, or at least smoothened, several frictions. For example, when I started in the industry more than 20 years ago, there was a lot of blame game, right? This kind of ping pong between development, operations, testing. No, it's your fault, you didn't do this, or you didn't test this properly, or it's not ready to deploy, all this kind of stuff, right? So we've gone a long way to kind of bring these teams together, share their problems, and talk and find good solutions. We even have build and run teams, or stream-aligned teams, as we call them in Team Topologies. Other kind of frictions around this idea that we actually need pretty good tooling to do our job as engineers well, right? And if you think even, I guess, 5, 6, 7 years ago, this wasn't really much of a concern. And people like Daniel Bryant, who is here today, who is going to talk as well, and other people have really been promoting this idea that, guys, this is difficult. So we need to have good tooling, good ways of doing things that are repeatable, so we can actually focus on our business, our goals for the customers, right? Also, a lot of the friction around what we now talk a lot about cognitive load on teams, right? If you have hundreds of different tools, frameworks, and products that you need to use just to do your day-to-day work, that's going to be quite complicated. So I think we've come a long way, again, with ideas like platform engineering, platform as a product, to help teams be able to do things in an easier way, faster way, right? That we can focus our attention on the things that are more fundamental to the business and our customers. So I'm not saying that all these issues and friction went away completely, but we've made a lot of progress, I think. So now it's interesting to think how much of these ideas reflect or are considered outside of engineering. When we look outside, Do other people think about fast flow? What is the impact of the way they work on fast flow and being able to deliver value quickly to customers and to the business? Well, not so much, right? So there's really, I see this abyss of understanding almost between engineering, broadly speaking, you might call it technology, IT, or what have you in the organization, but engineering and other parts of the organization, whether it's HR, finance, legal, etc., right? So the principles we talk about for fast flow of loose coupling, more autonomy for teams, removing dependencies, having good interfaces between teams and between systems, all these things are quite foreign to people who are not working in engineering. So what I want to do is show you like these frictions that we try to address with DevOps, and we have been successful. It's not perfect, but to some extent we have done it, are quite stark when we look outside of engineering, right? Think about your own experience, maybe how long it takes to get some training that you needed approved. Maybe it takes longer to get the approval than the actual training takes, right? Or, this back and forth spreadsheets, no, this is wrong, you need to change this, or you need to add this other thing. And teams saying, no, you cannot do that just because it's slightly different from what's their standard process. That tends to happen a lot, right? So there's still a lot of this friction that I see in many organizations. The friction about usability and the experience of using the tools, in this case, is more about internal processes that we have in the organization, right? Whatever that might be, recruiting, budgeting, all this kind of things. There's also a lot of friction. I mean, who likes to have 20 emails in a thread with spreadsheet version 1, version 2, final, this is the real final, etc., right? No one likes that. Like, we're still seeing a lot of this stuff. So even though it's not exactly tooling that we're talking about, like the usability and thinking about the experience of going through these processes is still quite poor. And the cognitive load, right? Think about how for some of these processes, you have to not only change your context. You're doing your regular work, now you have to change, and now I have to submit some request for approval, and now I have to remember that in 2 weeks I need to check if it was approved or not, or I need to contact this other person. Oh, it turns out they're on holiday, so I need to wait another week. This is actually consuming part of our capacity of focusing on our work, right, on our day-to-day work. So it's actually causing cognitive load as well. So there's a lot of impact, let's say indirect impact, on fast flow because of all this kind of frictions as well. It might not seem as direct impact as we see in engineering, where you see, well, if I have to wait for another team to do a deployment for me or for us, or create some resources, that's very clear that it blocks the flow of value, right? We cannot get a change into the hands of the customers because of that. And this impact is a bit more indirect, but it's actually, when you look at it, and you look how many teams, especially in large organizations, are impacted by these sort of frictions in all these processes that we have, that's actually quite considerable. I have a little story. One of my clients that I did a little bit of work with them, maybe it was about 10, 12 hours we did some work sessions, discover some stuff. And then the process of getting the invoice approved took maybe up to 5 hours in total and a few weeks. So that doesn't feel like a right balance, right? And they had good intentions. So this is not about people having bad intentions. They had a portal where you could submit your invoices, etc. But turns out then you need to figure out who needs to approve what are the different steps. And this was putting basically the cognitive load on me to figure all this stuff out, right? That's why it took several weeks, a few hours. And so when we have all this kind of friction happening, what tends to happen is that when we go a little bit outside of our, let's say, our engineering bubble, between quotes, is that these interactions with the rest of the organization often lead to conflicts because we feel we don't have the autonomy to get things done that we need. We need some training, or we need to recruit a new person for our team, etc. And there's a lot of blockers, a lot of difficulties. So we have conflicts, we have difficult interaction sometimes, and this leads to frustration and people feeling disengaged, right? So I have another little story I want to share with you about this. We had one CTO that wanted to purchase one of our video-based training online about fast flow. And he was the CTO, right? And so he had a budget, I think was around $500 per year. Great. Our courses are about $200 or something. And then he realized, they told him, well, yes, but you can only spend $150 per quarter. Okay. That causes a bit of a problem. And so he went back and forth with the budget team to try to sort this out. And we're talking about CTO at a small company. And so when you think about it, the time he lost in this friction, plus the fact that he couldn't get the training that he wanted to improve the organization, that actually can have a quite, it's maybe not easy to measure, but you can see that has quite significant impact. And so in this story, the only team that wins is the team responsible for the budget, right? For them, it's very straightforward. It's very algorithmic, right? They just say, well, if it's more than 150, then no. If it's more than 500 accumulated over the year, then no. January 1st, we're going to reset the budget. So it's very efficient from their point of view, but it's not focused on what's the good outcome for the organization and the teams. So in general, if they're not given, let's say, other kind of directives and incentives, teams tend to optimize for low-value internal processes over high-value outcomes. And so, because other teams usually are not thinking about this idea of fast flow of value to customers, what tends to happen is that they're optimizing for their processes to be more efficient, to run more cycles of the things that we do, and not necessarily really providing flexibility to adapt to new circumstances, new use cases, and all that we need to achieve better outcomes. So I believe that if we start thinking about others, other teams, other individuals in the organization as our customers, that can help us. Because then we're thinking about what does it mean, how does it help the things that we do as a team, whatever that is, HR, finance, etc. Not trying to pick on anyone in particular. What we do and how we offer this to our teams in the organization, does it help them? Does it allow them to get to the outcomes they want faster or the results they want faster or not? So it's basically a shift in perspective. And yes, they're also our peers, but if we think about them as customers as well, that can actually change quite a lot. So before Sam Newman starts to ask me, okay, but what do you mean by platform? We've been talking about platforms. What is the meaning, right? I fully agree with that. We need to come back to, okay, what do we mean when we're talking about a platform? So we are fully aligned with Evan Botcher here. So he's talking about a digital platform as a foundation of self-service APIs, tools, services, knowledge and support arranged as a compelling internal product. So this is often the definition that we use and refer to in engineering, right? And so what we've come to realize, I guess, that if we treat the platform as a product, it means we're treating the users of the platform as our customers. So inside engineering, like I said earlier, that's pretty much some of the progress we've made around that. That's great, but it can be the other way around, right? If we think about our customers, our users as customers, then we can think about what we offer as a sort of platform as a product, right? So specifically outside of engineering, we might start with, think about the others as your customers, not just people who need to follow your processes. So I do think this platform mindset can be a really good pattern for overcoming friction between silos across the organization, right? Not just inside engineering. Here's one example where we've kind of gone a bit outside of engineering, right? So who here is familiar with data mesh? I see a few hands. So there's this awesome book by Zhamak Dehghani where she talks about this idea of data mesh. It's essentially, it's a domain-centric data architecture, and it's also an operating model where we treat data as a product. And there are 4 fundamental principles of data mesh. One is domain ownership, basically realizing that data is not a commodity that we just store in some data lake or data warehouse, right? Data has business value. And so we need teams who are close to the source of the data to be looking at it as a product, right? How do we transform this data into something that's easy to consume? And that's where we go usually outside of engineering, and you have business teams that are looking to get insights from the data we have from our systems. And so we're kind of exploring crossing that border between these 2 areas, right? And I think that's partially why data mesh can be so powerful, that effectively we're thinking about, okay, who are the consumers of this data, and how do we provide it in a way that they can actually be actionable for them, people who are not typically technical people, right? So we need to think about the data and how do we transform and provide it as a product. And so there are other things like you need platforms, and there are sort of multi-layered platforms in data mesh as well, from the infrastructure level to data pipelines and so on. I won't go into a lot of detail. And then there's governance as well in terms of understanding, again, from a customer point of view, maybe we need a combination of data products, right? We need to combine things to get new insights. And so making sure we have some degree of interoperability, that we can actually combine these things. So I think it's an interesting example of going outside of engineering, right? So I would like to take a few moments to do sort of state of the union of platform engineering, if you like. I should say platform as a product is better. I don't know if anyone attends DevOps Days conferences here. But back in the early 2010s, so I know for some of you that's you were not even in professional career yet, but John Willis, who is well known in the DevOps field, used to do this State of the Union of DevOps. So I think it's useful just for us to talk about, okay, what have we achieved? What are the things that are still missing that we need to work on? And it's not absolutely right that we're all on the same page, but at least we get this conversation started. So what have we gotten right about this sort of engineering platforms and platform as a product inside engineering? This is obviously based on my experience and talking to different organizations. And so your mileage may vary. You might find some of this stuff, it's trivial in your organization, or they've been doing this for a long time. In other cases, you might think, well, this is almost like science fiction for me when I look at my organization. But again, it's just to get conversation started, and I try to be optimistic, right? So some of this stuff, I try to think that, maybe it's growing. So one thing is clear to me, at least, is we have a lot more focus on the user experience. And probably you can see that by how many vendors there are around tooling that focus on user experience, especially developer experience. And that's great. It's a sign that we've actually understood how important this is. So we have better tools and the right tools for the job, like with the proper interface. I think we've also made a lot of progress in understanding platforms as a key kind of pattern to manage cognitive load at scale. So it was actually a couple of years ago, there was the State of DevOps report from Puppet, and they actually found that what they called highly evolved firms in terms of DevOps maturity and getting better results and more performance, et cetera, use a combination of these streamlined teams, or if you want to think about them as build and run teams, and platform teams as the most effective way to manage cognitive load at scale. That's because we're helping teams focus on their core business, let's say, the things that we need to provide for the organization, for our customers, and move things that, all those different tools and frameworks, all the details, into this kind of engineering platforms. So we have better abstractions, we have better APIs and portals, whatever we need to do our job more effectively. Again, it's not perfect, but we're having these conversations, we're moving in this direction. Now here, I'm being optimistic, but start to see more understanding of platform as a coherent set of services, right? So it's not that it's a generic platform where we put everything in that. That's basically just a bucket of shared services. And so hopefully organizations will start to see these being more considerate and be more thoughtful about, okay, what exactly are the platforms we provide? What are they trying to help our teams with? So if we're saying it's a data platform, but what kind of data platform? Is it the infrastructure? Is it at the database provisioning level? Or are you talking about data pipelines? Or are you talking about data services, et cetera, right? So each sort of platform should have this kind of objective. What are we trying to help the others with? And have coherence internally, and have coherence in terms of the interface it provides to our users, right? So we might have multiple services inside the same platform, so the interfaces they provide should be consistent so that teams can use them easily. I still see many places where the platform is, like I said, this kind of bucket of shared services, and that kind of causes a lot of issues, right? Where if we just put up what we call a platform team or platform engineering team on top of this bucket of shared service, that's not going to really help us much. What about this one? What do you think? Do you see platform teams with extensive product experience? Maybe, okay. They have some relevant product experience. Maybe that's still a bit ambitious in my experience from what I've seen, again. Hopefully in your organizations may be different. I think more realistically, we start to see platform teams with a bit of product experience. Maybe you have a product manager for the whole platform. Maybe you have product owners inside the platform teams. So it's starting to happen, I think, but it takes some time. And this is something I often recommend. Really have your more experienced product people in the platform and help them learn kind of the technical specificities of your engineering platforms, right? But they bring a lot of very important approaches and thinking about how do we provide this platform as a product, and also how we prioritize what is the vision for our platform, and how do we adapt over time as needs change. So again, this is maybe optimistic, but I think we start to see more of this understanding. So now if we go to what is missing, a few things that I've seen at least. I think there's still a lot of lack of understanding that platform boundaries need to be fluid. So when we have rigid platform boundaries, we might block teams. If we say, this is part of the platform, no, and we cannot allow teams to do things differently, or we cannot move certain functionality outside of the platform, then we're making it more rigid. And that might block teams, because what happens often, we do some premature optimization. We think, oh yeah, this is a common thing, we can move it to the platform, especially when we're talking about some kind of core functionality for some systems. And we prematurely think, well, this can be sort of standardized in the platform, everyone can use it. But then we don't make the room to understand, okay, maybe the stream teams might actually start to see different use cases and have different needs. And so basically, the boundaries of platform should be more flexible. We should be looking at, okay, what are the things that maybe need to move out of the platform, or we need to allow at least teams to do things in a different way. Another important aspect that I think many platform teams still don't fully grasp is that the user experience is not just about the APIs and the interfaces. Obviously, that's a big part. But it's also the education around what we're providing, right? So oftentimes, it's not that the other teams don't use the platform because we don't have the right tooling. It's because they don't necessarily have the experience or the background to be able to understand how this platform service is going to help us, right? So education is part of the user experience. And specifically focusing on, from a platform perspective, what are the proven patterns that we've seen help teams on the ground that we can sort of provide in the platform. And this doesn't necessarily need to be even like a running service or some kind of library or what have you. It can just be some good documentation that helps team understand, well, if you need to do this, if you follow these steps, or if you have this use case, look at this A, B, and C, and this is going to help you, right? Obviously, we often end up needing, some actual running services and tooling, etc. But this helps us kind of think about what does the platform really need to provide? Is this kind of empathic patterns to help the teams do their work more effectively and learn as well? Now, this is interesting, I think. We need to be mindful of cognitive load on the platform teams themselves. And there are many reasons why platform teams end up being overloaded. First, all the tools, the frameworks, and the things they actually use inside the platform that they're abstracting for the other teams to have a better developer experience, right? That's one thing. Sometimes platform teams also have a lot of software that they're responsible for. Recently, with one client, they actually had a platform team that, as they told me, had basically built their own PagerDuty tool, right? And I'm like, why would you do that? We're not talking about a small company. We're talking about a multi-million revenue company, right? So that's another source of cognitive load. We're rebuilding stuff that we should be using and buying from the outside. And the third thing that increases cognitive load on platform teams, I think, is that they have usually many different hats to wear, right? We need to do the development of the services in the platform. We need to operate them, with good levels of availability, performance, etc. Like I said, we need to also help enable our users and our customers by helping them understand the domains that the platform is helping them with, whatever that might be, monitoring, observability, data services, etc. And we need to communicate and to sort of market our platform as well for other teams, especially in large organizations, to know what's happening and to be able to use it. So there's a lot of cognitive load for platform teams if we're trying to do this platform as a product approach. And my advice here is essentially, look at approaches that help clarify what is the focus of this platform team or of the different platform teams, and how do we simplify interactions with other teams. So essentially, we can use in engineering things like inner sourcing, for example, if we want to make it easier for other teams to provide changes to the platform that help do the things they need. We might be looking at even time boxing different activities. Okay, let's spend a certain amount of time enabling teams so we know we need to reduce maybe the time we spent on developing new features, for example. Whatever approaches help us to clarify what are we doing, why, and how much effort are we spending as a platform team. There's also a question around trust boundaries. This is something I really see very few organizations even think about. So as humans, there are different trust levels we have depending on the size of the group that we're part of, right? So it's something called Dunbar's number, which means it's known as, we can keep in our mind up to 150 connections and have meaningful connections with those people. So what does this matter for platforms? Well, I often see, for example, organizations organized by tribes, and they have a platform tribe. And this might be good for internal communication inside the platform tribe, but it might be a problem for communication with the other tribes, which are the ones who are going to use the platform, right? And so I think we need to be much more thoughtful about where do we place the platform from an organizational perspective, right? It needs to be close to the teams that are going to be using the platform. The further away we are, whether it's in the organizational chart or even in terms of the location access to the platform teams, that's going to have an impact on the effectiveness of the platform. So that's why I think platform organization design, where do we place the platforms, which teams exist, we need to think a lot more about that, and we need to optimize for high trust. And so one of the things I also recommend often to customers is to, if you're starting with a new kind of platform and some new teams, don't rush into, okay, what do we need to build and what do we need to provide? Spend some time kind of creating the connections with the teams that are going to be your customers. Help them, enable them to understand that maybe some of your domain in the platform that you're building. Because that's going to build the trust that later on, when you actually have running services, is going to be much easier for other teams to feel confident to adopt them or to ask questions, ask for help, etc. Again, if you have the platform tribe totally isolated and just coming up now and then in your chat tool and saying, here's a new service or a new feature, that's probably not going to be very effective. So that's it in terms of state of the union around platform as a product. And so I want to go back to this outside of engineering. What does this mean, right? And why should we treat others as our customers? And let's try to look at some examples, basically visualize what could be in the future. That's the main topic of this talk, right? So you might be asking right now, why are there bananas in this slide? And I'll come back to that in a minute. But what could be compliance as a platform? So I'm using some simple diagrams. I hope they're simple enough that we can have this shared conversation. What could be compliance platform? Well, probably, often, we need some sort of understanding of regulations that apply to the things we're building, right? As a stream-aligned team or a team providing some product to our customers, we need to understand in terms of the compliance, what are the regulations that apply? What do we need to make sure we're following, right? What kind of controls? So maybe a sort of platform approach that we can make this self-service pattern would be, maybe we have a service that allows us to search for regulations, right? Maybe we have some auditing checklists service. So I'm calling this stuff service because it means we're looking to provide this as a self-service approach. And yes, eventually this could become some running service, but it could also just be really good documentation and guidance on, okay, what can you use to check if your service is compliant? So turns out some organizations, a few already do this. And so the bananas come from a conversation I had where someone working at an organization where they work with labeling food. Turns out regulations around that, just to get the right labels on bananas, actually quite complicated, more than I would expect. And so they do something like this. They don't call it platform, but they try to empower the teams that are doing, and the people who are doing that work, by providing this sort of regulation service, which includes guidance, includes kind of giving them context on what do you need to check and why is this regulation important. What about legal as a platform? Well, maybe we can have some services that provide some standard contracts. For example, if we're working with third parties, right, to do our implementation. So maybe we have some service that provides NDAs and other provides statements of work, this kind of thing. Again, it's mostly documentation, but it's also what are the patterns around this? What is the context that helps us understand how do I use this? And to be clear, the point is not that every team in the organization becomes a legal expert. I strongly recommend you don't try to do that. It's just to accelerate the common use cases where we don't really need that much expertise in this area, in this domain. Again, turns out this is already happening. So for some work that I did, we did a prototype of a new tool, work with this organization, and I was in contact with an agile coach, and basically I could see from his email thread with the legal that they had this sort of approach, that they had this standard contracts and explanation of when to use what, right? So it's actually sort of happening. What about leadership as a platform? Again, it's not that the only thing we need to do is the platform. Obviously, when you're in leadership position, you're going to need to do a lot more. But what are the things we can provide as a platform, right? And maybe we need some artifacts, some mirror boards, or what have you, that provide direction, that help teams that are working on the products think through, okay, what is the direction that the organization is going? What are we trying to achieve? And have the right questions in those artifacts to help the teams with the right context, because this depends on your business context, make better decisions. Maybe we have some sort of metric service that we can better understand what should be looking at in terms of business metrics. Again, this is already happening to some extent. There's a consulting company in Norway where actually what they call the leadership team became what they call team strategy. So they've been trying to apply the ideas of team topologies across the whole organization. So they're not very large, about 100 people, 150. And so leadership started seeing themselves as, okay, we need to be more of a platform approach and help the teams who are actually doing the products and services better think about what do we need to know in terms of strategy, mission, metrics, etc. What about company as a platform? Does that even make sense? Well, it starts to get a bit more complicated, right? We might have a group of companies where different companies, so we're here at the higher level of, let's say, a higher level view of this diagram is not at the team level, but we have a group of companies. Some companies rely on a third company that provides the platform. Inside that platform company, we might have engineering-related platforms for your typical cloud services, compliance, InfoSec, etc. You might have non-engineering platforms around HR, legal, etc. Now, I think there are some pros of this approach, which would be to do this means we really understand the platform as an acceleration engine for the whole group, right? And we're sort of having same ways of working inside this platform company, regardless if it's engineering or non-engineering types of platform. But there are also quite significant difficulties here in terms of building trust between these different companies. If it's hard enough inside the same organization across different groups, when you go across companies, it's even harder, right? But again, turns out from some conversations I had, there is at least one example where a group of companies is doing this. And in that discussion, that's exactly what I found out, that they had to do a lot of effort in terms of communication, of getting better understanding between this platform company and the kind of business-focused companies. But to some extent, they've been successful with this. Now, remember the example of legal as a platform? Well, it's not exactly this ideal, right? So in the real world, it's not just about having this nice diagram where things, okay, and teams consume the platform in this X as a service way, self-service way. That's great to define and as a sort of our goal, but in real life, things don't really work exactly like that because things change. So in that example I gave you, when I was in contact with this other organization for running a prototype, they were not exactly our customers because there was no commercial engagement. We were just running a prototype and having some of their teams participate. And so we ended up not being able to have a proper non-disclosure agreement for this kind of work because the platform, the legal platform on their side was very rigid. There was no openness to, okay, there's a new use case, let's figure out how to do this. Or at least don't block the teams that need different use cases for this type of legal work. So we ended up not being able to run this prototype with this company. So there's a real impact on having this kind of rigid platform boundaries and saying this is it and we cannot change it. So what we really need is to understand how this evolves over time. These sort of diagrams are should only be a snapshot in time. What we probably needed at that time was some sort of collaboration to understand, well, this team actually needs a different sort of NDA agreement for this kind of work, prototyping. The compliance as a platform example as well. Yes, ideally, everyone can self-serve, they have the right information, patterns, contacts, etc. But in reality, that's not enough. You probably need to do some facilitating. You need to help them understand which regulations applies, not just a matter of providing this as self-service. You need to do sort of the groundwork first, and probably on an ongoing basis as you have new teams and new people joining. At the end of the day, if we want this kind of approach to work, and this applies in engineering and outside as well, we need to have this understanding of the evolution of, we need to, some shared principles and approaches that play well together, right? That we can keep this thing helpful in the long run, not just in the beginning stages where we define something ideal. In the real world, things are going to change. So late last year, there was this conversation on Twitter, and Byron Miller, who works at Red Hat, I found this quite insightful. He was saying, it's not about autonomy, doing what you want, it's agency to operate with safety within the encoded values that are jointly shared. So he was talking about engineering platforms, right? That they should encode certain values. He was talking about things like safety, what is the resilience, availability, observability, etc. And to some extent, that should be embedded in the platform itself, right? It's not just about functionality that we provide. And this idea of encoding values and having shared values, I think, is what's key. And again, having common understanding of what we're trying to do with these sort of platforms and how do they evolve over time. So some ideas prioritize fast flow of value to end customers, right? Over prioritizing our internal processes and making those simpler and faster, that's not always the best thing to do. And often it's not the best thing to do if we're focusing on how do we get value to our customers faster. Focus on unblocking others, other teams, other individuals in the organization through this kind of curated self-service patterns. The platform should be open to change, should not be a rigid boundary around the platform. We are going to need to collaborate when we discover new needs. We're going to need to change the platform. Sometimes we're going to need to even move things out of the platform if we realize actually there isn't as much common ground to say this is something that we can have in the platform. And we need different teams to do their own thing, and that should be okay if we understand why. But in general, or more frequently, it's about being open to new use cases, new needs, and so we need to adapt the platform, any kind of platform. Optimizing for adoption and discoverability. We can have a great service or even a great wiki that works as a platform with the right patterns, context, documentation, but if no one knows about it, it's still not very helpful, right? And we should be enabling others by understanding where they are today. Different teams, different people have very different background, experience around this domain of the platform that we're providing, whatever that might be, engineering or legal or leadership, any of these examples, right? you can't expect that it's just a matter of providing the platform and then people will come, understand, and use it. We need to figure out where the different teams, different people are. So I hope next week, when you go back to your organization, when you find one of these sort of abyss of understanding, when you were sort of interacting outside of the engineering bubble, let's say, that hopefully you think about some of these ideas and you maybe plant the seed for more understanding of these ideas of fast flow and blocking others, providing helpful, proven patterns that help teams do their work more effectively. And so it might just be, looking at what's a simple way that we can do this training approval process simpler or faster, right? And maybe you can point them also to this sort of vision of think about part of your work is to provide platform approach where you treat others as customers. So maybe in a few years, we'll start to see more of this platform as a product approach outside of engineering as well. And hopefully that will make the work environment more motivating, less frustration, and at the end of the day, that people are more efficient and they feel more engaged with the organization as a whole and not just in our sort of engineering group or bubble. And that's it. Thank you very much. Appreciate everyone coming today.
Thank you, Manuel. I believe we have Slido questions and we have some time. Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes. That's for you.
Thank you.
There's a picture of you inside. If you don't like it, I didn't draw it. If you do like it, I did draw it. Oh, okay. Anonymous is back with his questions. How much platform engineering, open brackets, and team topologies, close brackets, would you say there should be in small organizations, e.g. 10 to 30 people? Worthwhile or over-engineered?
That's an interesting question. And so I also get the question often of, do startups, can they have platforms? Should we have platform teams? And if you look at it, it's really this mindset of, what is useful platform is providing these patterns that help teams do things. So in a very small organization, like 10, 15, 30 people, you're probably not going to have a dedicated platform team. But you might have some more senior people who are providing these patterns for the ones who are joining, right, as we grow. And so there's no kind of fixed number that we should be looking at, but we probably want to make sure that we're providing platforms that are helpful and are as thin as possible, that we're not building too much stuff. So we might not need as many people as we would expect. Maybe with less people, we can do more if we really focus on what are the patterns that help. Do we really need to build this or not? Or is this more of a providing the right art, documentation, and so on?
We've got time for one more, sure. Manuel. We've only got time for one more, so if your question is up here and I don't ask it, Manuel will take, or are you running away?
I'm happy to take questions. My flight is only in the evening.
You can come and ask your question in person. Manuel's very nice.